It's on. It's on Facebook.
Okay. So Elisa, I'm starting, okay? Yeah. So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this collective launch of the report Gates to a Global Empire. My name is Ruchi Shroff, and I work with Navdanya International. We are based in Italy, and we've been working for almost a decade now to expose and resist the corporate takeover of our seed, food, and agricultural systems, and interconnect this complexity of consequences and crises that the industrial agricultural model has created. There's a lot of buzz today about the much needed transformation of the dominant food system model, seen as the root of the multiple crises we face. While on one hand, we have movements, small farmers, seed savers, indigenous and local communities, co-creating and working in harmony with nature and demonstrating biodiversity-based agroecology as the only viable solution. On the other hand, we have entities pushing the continuation of the industrial agricultural model and its next digital iteration in the form of farms managed through artificial intelligence, fake foods such as lab-grown meat, biofortification, gene drives, digital sequencing of genetic information, and being touted as this new, smart, and innovative solutions to the multiple crises we face. But in actuality, these solutions are no such thing, and in the end up pushing us towards a further iteration of the industrial agricultural system, which brought these crises in the first place. And embodying and actively supporting these false solutions is the philanthrocapitalist Bill Gates, one of the two wealthiest people on the planet, now seen as this coy, generous, impatient optimist looking to put his money to use helping the world's poor. But before this full PR makeover and after multiple antitrust lawsuits, Gates held the reputation of a ruthless tech giant out to strong-arm collaborators, squash competitors, and clear the way for the monopolistic Microsoft empire. And this strategy is now being imposed, to influence the global development agenda to align with his very specific interests and imposing a consensus by directly influencing all actors of the global development juggernaut, including international institutions, universities, research centers, corporations, and states, and imposing this techno-solutionism that any problem can and should only be solved through technology and the rules of the private market. To help us pierce through this thick PR fog around the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and expose the pattern of this ruthless consolidation of the development agenda and program, we are very fortunate to have with us the authors of the various contributions and articles that we have published in this collective report, and I'm honored to welcome and introduce them today. We have with us Chito Medina, founding member of Masipag, Claire Robinson, managing editor of GM Watch, Dr. Michael Antonio, reader in molecular genetics in the Department of Medical and Molecular Genetics at King's College, Timothy Wise, senior advisor at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, Nicoletta Dentico, journalist and director of the Global Health Program of Society for International Development, Heather Day with the Community Alliance for Global Justice and Agra Watch, Farida Akhtar, founding executive director of UBING in Bangladesh, Seth Itzkan, co-founder and co-director of Soil for Climate, Jonathan Latham, molecular biologist and former genetical engineer, and now editor of the website Independent Science News, Silvia Ribeiro, Latin American director of the ETC Group, Jim Thomas, co-executive director and researcher ETC Group, Adelita San Vicente, director general of the Primary Sector National Resources in Mexico, Ali Tapsoba, president of the Terra V Association in Burkina Faso, and Dr. Vandana Shiva, founder of Navdanya and the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology. Thank you all very much for joining us today. To collectively launch this report, we will have brief presentations from all of you. And I would like to first begin with Dr. Vandana Shiva to please introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Ruchi. Thank you for the amazing team at Navdanya International that brought out this report on the Gates to a Global Empire, in spite of vacations in Europe in spite of lockdown, in spite of all kinds of problems. And thank you to all the contributors and authors for responding so positively when we asked you to join us in this endeavor of creating a global citizens report on Bill Gates. At one level, it's taking me back to nearly 36 years ago, when I was compelled to look at why Punjab was erupting in violence, why Bhopal had had a genocide, and looked at the Green Revolution. It is known to be a failure in India. It is known that industrial agriculture is at the root of the pandemic, the climate crisis, the extinction crisis, the hunger crisis, the chronic disease crisis, the destruction of small farmers. And precisely at this time where the world is looking at better ways to farm, Gates is pushing the failed Green Revolution on Africa. And he doesn't stop there. He now wants one agriculture for the whole world. Gates Ag 1, he said in January this year. He's too impatient to understand that there's diversity of climates and cultures and crops. He's impatient to create one giant monoculture, one kind of thinking, driven by poisons. He has huge partnerships with the poison cartel. And he continues the work of the Monsantos. If Navdanya was started, it was started with one dedication: to keep the seed free, to let the seed evolve in diversity and self-organization, to have freedom for the farmers and seed sovereignty for the farmers, to keep their seeds. Wherever they lost their seeds, farmers lost their sovereignty, they lost their economy, they lost their land. We have witnessed this crisis grow. But if the CGR system was already a problem, and we'll hear about this from Chito, Bill Gates taking over the consultative group on international agriculture research created by the World Bank system, which took all the seeds of the peasants. Now Bill Gates controls it. And then, of course, he's got big control over the Svalbard seed bank and the crop trust. So he's taking control of the seed. He would like to take control over agriculture. He would like to push every failed GMO. In India, they tried to bring GMO rice, golden rice, in 2000. We managed to prevent this blind approach to blindness prevention. So much diversity in the world. Our studies showed that we could have much more vitamin A if we grew biodiversity of crops. And now there's a movement in Philippines where Bill Gates took golden rice. In 2010, 11, we stopped BT brinjal because the BT cotton had failed. It had cost farmers lives. Most of the farmers' suicides are in the cotton belt. 95% of the cotton, BT cotton, is owned and controlled by Monsanto, now Bayer. BT cotton would do the same: failure to control pests, failure to be able to reduce farmers' expenditure, instead increase farmers' expenditure and drive debt. Gates took the failed and rejected BT brinjal to Bangladesh, and we'll hear about it from Farida. And if the work of Navdanya began to defend the seed freedom by saying seed is not a machine, it's not invented by the Monsantos and Bayers, but it is not invented by Gates either. Life self-organization and complexity is not a trivial word program of cut and paste. We'll hear about this from two amazing people, Michael Anthony and Claire Robinson, who've talked about gene editing. But gene editing, while pretending to be a reliable technology, is really about patenting and continuing the Monsanto enterprise of patents on life. And that is why the push by Gates on digital genomic mapping to subvert the international treaties, the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Nagoya Protocol. We'll hear about that subversion from Adelita. And the subversion of the FAO treaty on seed. through digital genomic sequencing, which eventually is about patenting, we will not be joined by Pepe Esquinas, who's the architect of that treaty. Gates is basically continuing all the failed enterprises of the poison cartel, of big pharma, of big ag, big food, and now converging all the technologies, all the tools in one experiment with life, with the planet. We will hear from Silvia Ribeiro about geoengineering. If climate change was the problem of blocking the sun with a greenhouse impact, to block the sun through geoengineering is not a very intelligent way to handle climate change. And if extinction is an existential crisis we are facing, deliberately driving extinction with gene drives is not just a bad idea, it's a crime against nature and humanity. We are all people who have defended the rights of nature, that defended the rights of people. We are standing together today to say we will continue to fight with love to protect the beauty of this planet, the freedom of people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shiva, for your presentation and remarks. I now invite Chito Medina to take us over the attempt and of the corporate hijack of rice science by the BMG Foundation and ERI.
Thank you, Ruchi, and thank you for Navdanya International for initiating this very important activity about the corporate control of science by Bill Gates. I am from the Philippines, and the International Rice Research Institute is in the Philippines. We may not be all eating rice among the panels and this seminar, but rice feeds more than 50% of the global population. And with this, Bill Gates has entered the ERI for 12 years, from 2008 to 2020. It has supported 15 projects amounting to about $154 million US. That is about 15% of ERI's budget per year over the years. But talking only about the bilateral restricted research, that is the research funding, it is about 64% actually by the funding coming from Bill Gates. So this is a very big amount. And this fundings to ERI actually has directed the researchers in ERI on two components. One is the technological component, mainly trying to modernize, quote unquote, rice breeding, that is the use of gene sequencing, gene markers, genetic engineering, and genetic editing, gene editing. And with this, it has eliminated the more affordable, more conventional approaches to improving rice and rice science. The bigger component of this at the moment is the golden rice, wherein Bill Gates has supported about 18 million US dollars from for 6 years, and this will be valid until 2022. What is interesting about this funding is it is up to commercialization. Normally, research is only research. The funding of Bill Gates is up to commercialization. So that is a big problem for all of us who are eating rice, because golden rice, genetically engineered rice, will be there very soon. The second component of the support of Bill Gates into ERI is the consolidation of national agriculture research and extension stations. That's the national research stations, that is into a partnership, into an alliance, so that he can consolidate, diffuse, and homogenize rice science and farming among all of these countries that are doing rice research. So with these activities, To summarize, Bill Gates has consolidated the technological approaches into his own wishes and perspectives, and has organized and consolidated all these national research institutions doing about research into pursue what he wishes to do. And so I said that Bill Gates has hijacked agricultural science and rise into corporate science for his own control. Too eerie at this point in time, but it has been spreading through national research stations. These researches, of course, are expensive and risky sciences, and at the expense of affordable technologies. Secondly, the technology being posed are covered by intellectual property rights, and so this will be very expensive for small-scale farmers that constitute majority of farmers in the developing world. With all of this, I say that Bill Gates really has been successful, actually, in influencing ERI, even the CGR, a consultative group in international agricultural research, as mentioned by Dr. Silva. And I concluded that Bill Gates has hijacked agricultural science into corporate science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ito, for your presentation. May I now invite Dr. Michael Antoniou and Claire Robinson to talk about gene editing and its risks and outcomes.
Thank you. So the Gates Foundation has promoted and invested in genetic modification technologies in agriculture with, however, nothing that's useful to show for it. This has happened over many years. The latest incarnation of the GM food venture is gene editing. This is supposed to be much safer and more predictable than the old style genetic modification. And my contribution to the Navdanya report, which I made with the technical help of Dr. Michael Antoniou, is on the dangers of gene editing in food and agriculture. And proponents of this technique claim that it's very precise and leads to predictable outcomes, but in reality, the technique is not precise or predictable. Scientific studies show that many unintended changes occur during gene editing processes, both at the intended edit site and at other locations in the genome. And the worry is that with regard to gene edited plants, these genetic changes could lead to changes in gene function, altered plant biochemistry, including the production of new toxins and allergens. And at that point, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Antoniou, who will say more.
Thank you, Claire. It is a great honor for Claire and I, obviously, to have contributed to this timely and groundbreaking report that highlights the flaws in the whole concept of that the Gates Foundation is promoting in an agricultural sphere. The only thing I would like to add to what Claire said, that in addition to the technology being nowhere near, or just not precise at all, actually, I was going to say nowhere near, but it's hardly, you could hardly call it precise, is that actually it's even doomed to fail before you even begin, simply because what the characteristics of a plant, of any organism, are there because of the functioning of the whole genome. The totality of the genes are working as a network and interconnected, balanced functioning. And this is what gives rise to the characteristics of a plant. And tweaking one or two genes with gene editing is not going to impart resistance to or tolerance to environmental stressors or pathogen resistance, disease resistance, or higher yield or better nutrition, and so on. This because these complex traits, as they're called, have at their basis the functioning, balanced functioning of all of the genes of the organism as a whole, a holistic system. Therefore, and this is the latest, this is the fact. What I'm saying to you here is not fantasy. This is the very latest understanding of genomics, of how genomes, whole gene systems work. And this is being completely ignored by those who push for gene editing, who are going to just tweak a few genes and think they will have these super miracle crops that are going to solve all the problems of the world's agriculture. This is just pure fantasy. The writing is already there to say they will fail because it's based on completely flawed concepts. So it's a complete waste of time. It's a complete waste of money. It's a complete waste of energy. These resources should be channeled to appropriate, holistic approaches to crop development within a holistic system of agriculture. And so this again was where Gates is backing the wrong horse again, rather than back natural breeding programs that maintain the integrity of the organism and can bring about the introduction of desirable complex traits into the plant. And within an agroecological system of agriculture, rather than backing that, he's backing something that is doomed to fail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Antonio and Claire, for your most important insight, especially on how Gates keeps backing all the wrong causes, and in fact keeps bringing us back into these failed technologies that we've seen again and again. May I now invite Adelita San Vicente and Aide Martinez, who is also the Director of Regulations of Biosafety, Biodiversity, and Genetic Resources, to speak about the digital sequence information. Adelita, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you very much, Ruchi. I'm very pleased to be with you, with all team of this report. I'm very grateful of you, and I'm so sorry because I don't have a speech to tell, but I have to tell you that we are working a lot now in the Ministry of Environment. Now I am the focal point of Nagoya Protocol, and we are very that we talk in the little report that we apport that we are working with the digital sequence because there are a lot of pressure in many teams, international teams. Then I'm so sorry for my English and to not have a speech, a special speech, but I'm so glad to be with you and be part of this report. Thank you very much from Mexico. All our love, our corn, and the honor to be in this team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adelita. Is Aide joining us too?
Yes, Aide is with me. Here.
It's an honor to stay with you. Today is very important to talk about this topic about the digital sequence. I think that it's important to put the topic in CBD because there are millions of sequences in databases that the people to access the database and to this sequence without the elemental put Nagoya Protocol, and it's a pleasure to see you. Nice to meet you by the.
Thank you very much, Aide. Thank you very much. I will now move to invite Timothy Wise to talk about the Gates Foundation and its failed green revolution in Africa.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be part of this illustrious group covering such a wide range of Gates Foundation initiatives, which I think is important to bring them all together in the way that Navdanya has done. So thanks to the editors of the report for pulling it together. My small contribution is on what I call the Gates Foundation's Failing Green Revolution for Africa. You may know the basics. In 2006, the Gates Foundation started an agricultural development program with a signature program on bringing the green revolution to Africa. They set goals in 2006 of doubling incomes and yields for 30 million small-scale farming households in Africa and cutting food security in half by 2020. We noticed that it's 2020, and we also noticed that the Gates Foundation and the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, neither one has produced any public evaluations that report on its progress toward those goals relating to yields, incomes, and food security. We tried to get them to provide that data for our study. They refused. So we looked at national level data and showed that there is absolutely no sign of any productive green revolution happening for Africa as it reaches AGRA reaches its 2020 deadline. Doubling of yields, not at all. Even for maize, its priority crop, we found that yields have only gone up 29% in 12 years. That's a relatively slow rate of yield increase, but more troubling, for a wider basket of staple crops, yields have gone up only 18%. And that is because all of the incentives for maize, which come not just from AGRA, but from input subsidy programs, advocated for by the Green Revolution proponents, have driven land into maize and out of more productive, climate resilient, and nutritious crops, such as millet, sorghum, sweet potato. So staple yields have gone up as a basket of goods far more slowly. Has these yield increases raised incomes? No. Poverty remains endemic. Rwanda, which is supposed to be one of the AGRA poster child success stories, endemic chronic extreme poverty has remained at 60%, where at 14 years ago it was at 63%. Has it improved food security? No. We found a 31% increase in the number of undernourished people in AGRA's 13 focus countries. So this is a program that is failing on all of its own terms. It is failing on a whole range of other terms that we all care about, such as soil health, crop diversity, sustainability, and the empowerment of small-scale farmers. We have been pressing the Gates Foundation and AGRA to respond to our report with evidence. And I think one of the more striking findings of our work is the lack of accountability of the Gates Foundation and of AGRA. Their unwillingness to do the basics of any major grant-making institution: set baselines, studies, set benchmarks, set goals, and report against those goals. The Gates Foundation has put more than $660 million into AGRA. The program itself has gotten $1 billion in funding, and yet there is no accountability for how that money has been used. I have joked that Bill Gates is like the 800-pound gorilla. You know the joke. Where does an 800-pound gorilla sit? Anywhere it wants. The Gates Foundation sits anywhere it wants, using its money to leverage a seat at the table, and then uses that seat to convince everyone else all the other policymakers and governments of what they should do. But it doesn't want any attention to what it is doing, right? It doesn't want its attention, any attention to the man behind the curtain, to draw on the Wizard of Oz imagery, who's pulling the strings and setting the agendas for African governments on the Green Revolution. In that sense, it is, the Gates Foundation is the elephant in the room. Again, to mix metaphors, the 800-pound gorilla who wants us to treat him like an elephant in the room and not talk about his influence. We have, I say that with making true apologies to those two noble species, the gorilla and the elephant. But I think it is apt. I will post in the chat links to some of the studies and key documents that we have produced on AGRA. Note that 3 African organizations, 2 of them involved in the study, have sent an open letter to AGRA demanding an evidence-based response to refute the findings in our report, and have gotten absolutely stonewalled. They continue to be stonewalled. We know that AGRA has 2 internal reports, internal evaluations they're refusing to make public. We're trying to get hold of those, and we're not going to stop until we do. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. He continues to push green revolution everywhere and all these failed models. On that note, I also invite Farida ji to talk to us about BT Brinjal and the Alliance of Crooked Science.
After listening to everybody, I know that who this crooked, comes from, where it comes from. I really thank you very much, and congratulate you for bringing out this amazing report and to be with this amazing group of people who have worked so hard. So thank you very much. In Bangladesh, we don't have any, we did not ask for this BT brinjal. We have so many varieties of brinjals in our country with lovely names and lovely ways of producing, cultivating, eating. And yet in our country, it is a shame that we have to have this BT brinjal. And that came particularly because after they failed in the Philippines and in India to get the approval, Monsanto and Mexico got really desperate to get an approval. They needed an approval for this crop. And at that time in 2013, our political situation was very unstable. There was a lot of fight going on between the government and the opposition. And that was the right time for them to get the approval. And, because in India, they learned that it was the environment minister who, after listening to the public, hearings, he just stopped it. So they had to take on the ministers and even the prime minister. So when we were going to protest against BT brinjal approval and the seed distribution, we found that when the farmers were actually not successful in cultivating the brinjal, and it was really not growing, or the fruits were not coming, so there were a lot of problems. And the farmers, once they took it, they were not willing to take it again. So it was imposed on them. But at that time, we found that it was Cornell University behind who was pushing it from the beginning in 2005, when the research was going on. Although apparently everybody says that it is Bangladesh Agricultural Research Institution, that is our one of the national gene banks, who is doing it, but that was just in the front. So from 2005, it was the Cornell University. And then when it was failing, we found Cornell Alliance of Science, which is based in Cornell University and also funded by Bill Gates, $5.6 million. funding, only to, it says, add a stronger voice to science and depolarize the charged debate around agricultural biotechnology. So it's that when we are writing the truth about BT Brinjal failure, they now hire Mark Linus kind of journalists to come and make a fancy story, it's all lies, they fancy stories and they publish, but they are not able to publish very much in Bangladesh. They are publishing in crop science, all these international papers. So they're actually misguiding the people. So, but yet now, till now, they are not able to produce any report on biosafety. So they did not bring any report on health safety or environmental impact, and they are not bothered about it. They still cannot prove that it is pesticide free, although that was the main point to convince the government. Cornell University just gives a honorary degree to our prime minister, saying that she is helping BT Brinjal. So this is the strategy they are taking. So they are not doing any science here. They are just trying to manipulate the information. They are trying to manipulate our politicians, and they are trying to impose on people. So this is what we have been fighting against. We now don't have to fight on the scientific grounds. We are fighting against their lies, where they are not able to say that it is pesticide free. Even their own reports are showing that it is 51% less use of pesticides, which is also not very true. So what in the report, as we said, that it is the crooked Alliance for Crooked Science and Corporate Lies. I think Bill Gates is really building on the lies and the crooked science, but we should not allow that. And I think this report will really expose these lies, and we will be able to fight against it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Farida ji. And I mean, you spoke about the Cornell Alliance and its involvement in pushing BT Brinjal in Bangladesh. May I invite Heather, who has who has contributed to the chapter on how the Cornell Alliance spreads disinformation and discredits agroecology.
Yes, hello everyone. Excited to build on what folks have shared, and especially excited to hear about the other research into the Cornell Alliance for Science. I'm with Community Alliance for Global Justice, which is based in Seattle. We founded our Gates Foundation Focus campaign in 2008 because we're based in Seattle. We're a small volunteer-led organization. So it's sort of a David and Goliath struggle to take on the Gates Foundation in our backyard, but not with all of you and all of us joining together around the world. Our campaign is called Auger Watch because we, we're concerned specifically as a food sovereignty organization with the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, but of course we could be called Gates Watch. And the report is the Messengers of Gates Agenda, a case study of the Cornell Alliance for Science Global Leadership Fellows Program. We first heard about the Cornell Alliance for Science after we launched our campaign focused on the GM banana, as there were fellows from CAS involved in promoting that project. And then we really got interested because we witnessed some of the shenanigans of young biotech students who are playing a really clearly well-orchestrated role and disruptive role in side events at the UN Convention on Biodiversity meetings, which we attended in Mexico in 2016. And then we started doing some research, and then last year an article kind of blew up on the ASFA listserv, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, which we're proud to be a member. Ally member, and that article was by one of the fellows, Nasib Mugwanya, and it was called After Agroecology, Why Traditional Agricultural Practices Can't Transform African Agriculture. So we started looking into him, and we published this case study, which is contributing to this growing literature on the Gates Foundation, but examining kind of a lesser known aspect of their strategy, which you've already mentioned, but just the role they're playing in framing the debates and shaping how issues are communicated, as well as fostering a new generation of leadership to carry forward its mission. So as mentioned, the CAS was launched in 2014 with a 5.6 million grant. They got a second major grant in 2017, and just last month received another 10 million. So they've now received a total of 22 million. I would say, so we focus on the Global Leadership Fellows Program, which is a 12-week intensive training course on science-based communications. It's been held at Cornell every year since 2015, except for 1 year. They typically host 20 to 30 young professionals, mostly communications professionals, and most of them have been African. In 2019, last year, 61% were African. And we wanted to find out how many of the fellows, if any, had ties to the Gates Foundation. So we researched the institutions affiliated with them to find out how much funding they had received. And we found that about 35% of the fellows were affiliated with institutions funded by Gates. The total agricultural related funding we could find from 2006 to 2019 was $776 million. So a little more than $750 million. And then we looked at the narratives discrediting agroecology employed in the article previously mentioned, again called After Agroecology. Mugwanya was a CAS fellow in 2015, he's Ugandan. He now has the title of CAS training team member and recently was featured in a webinar that CAS hosted on agroecology. And not surprisingly, we find an uncritical promotion of biotechnology. Biotech is equated with science, and critique of biotechnology is equated with anti-science. So we identified 4 false narratives that agroecology can be characterized as a particular and limited set of agricultural practices, that agroecology involves a glorification of the past and a rejection of the modern, that agroecology is being imposed upon African farmers from outside of Africa. For example, he claims in his home country that activists fighting GMOs are doing so under the influence of international environmental NGOs, and goes on to say that supporters of agroecology in Africa wrap itself in the cloak of anti-colonialism, even as the NGOs, this is a quote, wraps themselves in the cloak of anti-colonialism, even as the NGOs promoting agroecology are funded primarily by Western developed world donors. However, the truth is that peasants, including African peasants, are at the helm of the agroecology movement, of course. And the final false narrative is that agroecology will keep farmers locked in poverty and drudgery. So in funding CAS, of course, Gates is equipping fellows with the propaganda tools. But what we thought was most interesting about our research is that they also serve as the active support network to ensure they continue to promote these communications and push these narratives and ultimately push policies regarding agricultural development in Africa. And of course, the Gates Foundation and the Cornell Alliance for Science are using their affiliation with Cornell, a highly respected university, to claim scientific neutrality while really promoting communications that are aligned with agribusiness through the use of its fellows. And the message comes across differently if it's being spoken by Bill Gates or if it's being spoken by young African professionals. So there's just another aspect of their strategy that we have to expose, and that we're trying to organize with the Cornell community in Ithaca, New York, and build on their many years of work of trying to call out the Cornell Alliance for Science as just one aspect of our overall work. So thank you so much for including us, and to everybody for taking on the Gates Foundation. We really have to do this together. Appreciate it. And we do demonstrations at the headquarters any opportunity we can get. And it's great because we get media. There's TV, two of the TV stations are literally half a block away. So we found that we actually get pretty good coverage, which, you know, hasn't been true in much of our history of taking on various institutions in Seattle. So, you know, global days of action where we're doing that and y'all are doing that where you are, that kind of thing. I think it would be very strategic. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Indeed, we do have to do this together. And that is the idea of also bringing all of us here together who have been working on these issues for so many years now. From the takeover of seeds, biopiracy, pushing failed GMOs, gene editing, discrediting real science and agroecology, to pushing fake food. Seth, would you talk to us about the impossible foods and impossible patterns?
Hi, Ruchi and colleagues. Yes, I would love to. I'm going to do a very brief PowerPoint presentation. And I trust that you now see the slide. Can you confirm for me that you do?
No.
No, Eliza, can you give me a second? Okay, it should be. Is it that we are, no, I think you'll have to share a screen with us. Seth.
The screen sharing is allowed for panelists.
Share screen. Yep. Microsoft PowerPoint.
Now we see it.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, first of all, let me say unequivocally, it is an honor to be part of this wonderful collection of scholars and activists standing for the healthy regenerative future. And a shout out to my colleague, Tim Weiss at Tufts University. I'm glad to see Tufts is not corrupted by the Bill Gates clan yet, and won't be. Thank you. And I also want to say that I first read Vandana Shiva's book, Biopiracy, 20 years ago. And it got me thinking about this. And so I never imagined I would be part of a panel with her. And so thank you very much, Vandana, for your work in the world. So my name is Seth Itzka, and I'm the co-founder and co-director of a group called Soil for Climate. And we advocate for soil as a climate solution. I'll just very briefly talk about that and why the whole Gates and synthetic food and the intellectual property version of food is so horrific for nature and for our vision of restoring nature to mitigate global warming. Let's go on here to the second slide. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Okay, so now, so grasslands are the largest ecosystem on the landed surface of the earth. And they're the largest sink, if you will, for carbon. They love carbon. And okay, so there are the carbon molecules. We'll just go through this very quickly. So this is an exhibit. This is a picture from an exhibit called Exposed: The Secret Life of Roots. And what you see here is a photographic cross section of a grassland, but those are real plants and real plant roots mounted on top of it. And they were grown in tubes, and then the dirt was taken off the tubes. And you can see they're folded at the bottom because they're so long. Some perennial grass plants can be 12 feet deep. And the estimated amount of carbon in soil is in the realm of trillions of tons or thousands of gigatons. And we'll see that in the next slide. But the reason why soil is dark literally is because of the carbon in it. And in the next slide, what I want you to look at here really is your bottom left. You see where it says soil 2300, that's 2,300 billion tons or 2.3 trillion tons of carbon in soil. So it's the largest terrestrial reservoir of carbon other than fossil fuels themselves. And you'll see there at the very bottom, it says the fossil fuel pool, and then the deep ocean. But in terms of the surface of the planet, carbon is in soil, and that's what gives it its life and its vitality. And so our organization is partnering with an organization of Maasai in Kenya. They're called the Maasai Center for Regenerative Pastoralism. And our program is called Enkup Osiligi, which is a Maasai word for the promised land. And then the more perhaps descriptive term is also just called the Maasai Lands Restoration Project for Soils, Food, Water, and Climate. And this is a picture that I took a couple years ago when we were at the Training Center for Holistic Planned Grazing. And so this is an important part of this work, is doing something called holistic management or holistic planned grazing. And they were taking the training in this at the Mara Center in Western Kenya. And this is my colleague, Dalmas Tiampati. And these are some of the animals that we helped raise the money for. And they're basically managing the herds in a way which is ecologically restorative. So they're actually restoring the soil with this managed grazing. And excuse me one second. So we advocate for a type of grazing which heals the land, and thus it's a meat diet, but it's what we call regenerative meat. And so we push against the sort of the anti-meat narrative, which is only a very thin slice of the meat narrative, which just looks at the worst aspects of it and doesn't look at the whole picture. And so I wrote this essay called Software to Swallow. Impossible Foods Should Be Called Impossible Patents. And then the subtitle is Intellectual Property Model of Food Maintains Harmful Reliance on GMO Grains, Detracts from Regenerative Agriculture, Hastens Soil Loss. And then here are some of the many patents that are associated with Impossible Foods. And basically, you see at the bottom here, I write, software is food, swallowing intellectual property. Basically, this is just an extension of the software model of the intellectual property of codes, sequences of instructions into the food sector. And so for all practical purposes, Impossible Foods is really just intellectual property. It's really just an extension of the software model. And what you're really swallowing is intellectual property. And in this case, the most heinous aspect of this is the intellectual property of creating a facsimile of the heme molecule, which is what gives meat, what we have evolved to crave that. And they're just pouring it over a meal of genetically modified soybeans that have been sprayed with glyphosate. And it's just the most horrendous example of agriculture and fooling people into doing something good, which of course they aren't. And these are pictures from their own website. This is from Impossible Foods' own website of showing you how they make their food. And then in the top left, what you see there, where someone's pouring something red, they're actually pouring genetically engineered heme molecules over a meal of soybean mash. And of course, these are GMO soybeans sprayed with glyphosate, grown in fields like Iowa and North Dakota that should be tallgrass prairie. They should be carbon-rich tallgrass prairie with grazing, and that's our mission, is to bring that type of grazing back to restore the soil. And this is where it just really gets troubling for me personally, emotionally. So these are words from Pat Brown himself, the founder of Impossible Foods. He says, quote, excuse me while I turn my head slightly to read, animals have been the technology, have just been the technology we have used up until now to produce meat. What consumers value about meat has nothing to do with how it's made. They just live with the fact that it's made from animals. Pat Brown, as second quote from Pat Brown on their own website. The mission of Impossible Foods is very simple. It's to completely replace animals in the food system by 2035. Restate, it's to completely replace animals in the food system by 2035, 15 years from now. Pat Brown, right on his own website, look at what I have there. These are my words underneath. This is cultural genocide of pastoral people, cultural genocide. And I made this post, which I put on their Twitter page. The word is Ole Seri. Ole Seri. It means goodbye in the Maasai language. And then underneath I say there's no place for intellectual property imperialism in the regenerative food future. And guess what? I've been banned from the Impossible Foods Twitter account, okay? And I'm proud of that. So because of this tweet, I've been banned on Impossible Foods. So I want you to please follow me on Twitter, find this tweet, and keep retweeting it. Everybody needs to retweet this so that they're not gonna silence me just because they banned me. And so our objective is to enable regenerative grazing for food, water, and climate security on Maasai lands in Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Seth. Thank you very much for that presentation. I now invite Nicoletta Dentico to please talk to us about the philanthropic monopoly of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and how he's colonizing global health.
Thank you, Ruchi. Thank you, Navdanya International. I'm so thrilled and humbled of being in this group. I feel it's a real privilege. And as Tim said earlier, this is really a breakthrough and a timely exercise that we are conducting. And I'm really proud to be part of this endeavor. I think it's so important. Let me start with a quote from two researchers, Alana Shaikh and Laura Freschi. They say something very relevant, which I've mentioned in my book, just, you know, with the Bill Gates face on the cover. It's just coming. It will actually be in the bookshops tomorrow. They say that we live in a world in which, a quote, in which we can read an article on health or agriculture written by a pen that has been trained through a journalism program. We can read an article on health and agriculture project financed by Gates, written by a pen that has been trained through a journalism program financed by Gates, based on data gathered and analyzed by a scientific team that is financed by Gates. Okay? Is this the world that we want to live in? No, I think this is not the world that we want. I think that rather than being an impatient optimist, Gates is an impatient monopolist, and all the things that Tim and others have earlier said confirm that his philanthropy is the continuation of his entrepreneurial monopoly by other means. And therefore we have a serious problem for democracy, for freedom, and for biodiversity, as you clearly said, because it is not just that he wants to create a one agriculture. He has previously created a one health project. So he has this dogmatic approach that covers and embraces various fundamental areas of human and planet life. So I think we really need to be very mindful that this is not just health, it is not just agriculture, as bad as that is already, but it is, I think it's very important that this digitalization issue is coming up together with a biotech. So thank you so much. And I'm really very eager to read all these very technical things that Michael Antonio and others were mentioning earlier. We have a convergence along the same dogma of pharma, food, digitalization, and finance, because Bill Gates in his urge to serve the poor, or rather make markets for the poor, because that's his real drive, making markets for the poor. And he says it, he clearly, that's one of his main slogans. He's increasing his interaction also with the World Bank, especially for the big agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. He is creating new, he's helped creating new financial tools and financial products that contribute largely to the financialization of food and the financialization of health. And of course, they harvest profits, they make philanthroprofits for every type of, crisis or perceived crisis or real crisis that can emerge out of a world that is really extremely problematic and which is in the current situations as it is. I mean, 2020 with the coronavirus is actually exploding all the dysfunctionalities and the injustices of the world. You have elaborated at large about AGRA, and rightly so. You know very well, of course, that the AGRA president is going to be the special rapporteur and the special representative of the UN Secretary General for the 2021 World Summit on Food Systems. It is right that we, of course, illuminate the what I call the dystopia organized by the Gates Foundation and the clique and the very, elitarian group that, like Gates, are pursuing this horizon. But I think we need also to highlight the huge vacuum, the huge space that governments, policymakers have made for Bill Gates and the like to expand, to dominate, and to continue to do so in an increasing areas of human life. So this is something that I think we need to very seriously consider. And if they have expanded so much together with the private sector as brokers of the penetration of the private sector into global policy making, it's also because decision maker, the political arena is allowing them to do so. Of course, COVID-19 is accelerating this movement, which I, in my book, in the end, calls the new Davos consensus, because that's what it is coming to. As you know, the UN signed a structural agreement with the World Economic Forum in June of last year, and we are seeing its implementation being accelerated also thanks to COVID. With COVID and with the international effort aimed at devising a vaccine against the COVID-19, Gates is affirming his tentacular power, but also I think what we are seeing is that there is a kind of enhancing of his profile in all the narrative around the international effort for the vaccine, because he's now, on an equal standing with international multilateral organizations like the World Health Organization, which he has, of course, already conquered and bought largely, is today the first financer of the World Health Organization since the US administration has decided to freeze its contribution to the agency. So he's on an equal footing, on an equal standing with the WHO, with the World Bank, with the European Commission. And he is, recognized already alone, his own foundation, as an international multilateral organization, okay? With all the lack of accountability that earlier on you mentioned. And I would like to say, with the establishment of a privatization system that is now accepted by everyone. We can see that with the ACT accelerator, with this international initiative that has actually internationally been taken out of one of his ideas from the Gates Foundation, and which is driven by Gavi, the public and private partnership he has created for vaccines a long time ago, with the CEPI, the new public and private partnership that is looking at pandemic vaccines. All his men are controlling this arena. The CEO of CEPI is actually the former manager of intellectual property rights in Microsoft. So there is a perfect secondment and the perfect control, something that even member states, governments now are starting to worry about because of secrecy, lack of any possibility to access the contracts, the rules of the game that are being established under this international cooperation. One final word, I would like to say that Gates, through his funding, has been able in the last 20 years to also shape up a new generation of NGOs, of civil society organizations that are very, very emotionally kind of subdued to him and to his people very much. This is something that we really need to consider. And my last message that is the result of my research, and it goes throughout the agenda that I represented before, so beyond food and health, is that, of course, as you well know, his foundation, like all philanthropic foundations, are heavily, they have very serious fiscal advantages in the US and in all countries, maybe only except Sweden. And therefore, there is something that we needed to consider, and that is the taxpayer support to these foundations. We unknowingly contribute to what they do, to their political agenda, without having a say into this. In the US,
Nicoletta, we'll have to start wrapping up.
Okay, I will finish. So basically, as taxpayers, we have no say in this, but we contribute financially to what these guys are doing. So we really need to be very mindful and be very to be monitoring what is going on, the thing, and also I think change the scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta. I will move now to geoengineering and how Bill Gates is the sugar daddy of geoengineering. Can I invite Silvia Ribeiro from ETC to please talk about that?
Yeah, hi. First of all, I would like to say that we at ETC Group, I am the Latin America director of ETC Group. It's a small research group, and we are really very pleased to be in this collective, and thank Vandana, which is a longtime friend, and of ETC, and many fights, and Ruchi and all the others in this collective. And we think really that this is an extremely relevant work that we have put together to demystify one of the richest person in the world, the second one, which really has a heavy hand on our health, on our food, and also on our climate. And many people has heard about, you know, the acts of Bill Gates for privatizing seed, for introducing industrial agriculture in Africa, but many of these people has never heard that he is also the main private financier of geoengineering, climate manipulation. This is very coherent with the mentality that he uses on everything. Exactly as Vandana said some years ago, she said this is exactly this engineering mentality, to try to see the whole world as a machine that we can engineer. And the way maybe where he puts this more clearly is about supporting geoengineering. Geoengineering is the climate, is the manipulation of climate. It's in reality a set of theoretical proposals that are not in place, that are not proven to be useful for climate change, but they are not even aimed to address the causes of climate change, because the causes of climate change are related to the fossil fuel industry that is fueling both industrial agriculture and many of the bad things that we are speaking about here. And Gates personally has investments in both, in the research of these techno-fixes to manipulate the climate, but also in projects that are related to fossil fuels. So just to give you the idea is that, geoengineering by geoengineers is usually divided in two sets. One is like removing carbon from the atmosphere once it has been emitted. And the other one is to block the sun to reach theirs. Like Vandana also said once time for me was incredibly inspiring. She said, how can we think about blocking the sun? We need the sun. The sun is part of our life. Well, this is exactly what geoengineering is trying to do. Is to say, instead of going to the causes of climate change, which is emission of greenhouse gases and fossil fuels based industries like industrial agriculture, we can block the sun. In reality, they haven't proved that they can do it, but that doesn't hinder Bill Gates from his pocket, not through the foundation, from his pocket to be the main private financier of geoengineering research. So to give you an example on how this works, he financed the two main well-known promoters and researchers of geoengineering, which is David Keith and Ken Caldeira. And he gave them a bunch of money, millions, several millions, it's not completely clear how many, to fund a fund, which is called Pfizer. And this Pfizer fund is one of the main resources to fund other researchers on geoengineering. So he is financing the main researchers on geoengineering, financing very, very experimental research to do open air experiments. So it's not only about lab research, it's also about how to try to see how they could block the sun by experiments that will be done, for instance, in North America, in indigenous territories, without asking the indigenous people, of course. So on one hand, he is backing this research, but on the other hand, he's also investing in, for instance, the technologies of geoengineering that could give him more profits. So together with Chevron, Billiton, Occidental Petroleum, and the largest financier of tar sands in Canada, which is Murray Edwards, they also finance David Keith's company. David Keith is this main researcher on geoengineering. Besides researching on geoengineering, he also has a commercial, a for-profit company, where he told the oil companies some years ago that this will allow them to continue emitting and at the same time make a profit of so-called taking back, sequestering the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So this is the kind of business that Bill Gates is financing from his pocket and indirectly also through the foundation. And we invite you to read more on this article, but also to have this picture that, from health to food, to climate, to air, to soil, everywhere, this, which has more money than all the poor people in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, together with just a few more people, 8 people are more people than half of the poor people in the world. They are investing in how to perpetuate the fossil fuel economies. So we need to think about this also, and I invite you to look at this. I will be typing a site, the Geoengineering Monitor, where you can look for more information on this, and also the Hands of Mother Earth Manifesto, which is a manifesto signed by 200 organizations that you are also invited to sign, and that Vandana is also one of the signatories. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Indeed, from seed, food, agriculture, climate, his hands are everywhere. From there, can I ask Jim Thomas from ETC to talk about how Bill Gates is bringing gene drive extinction technology into the world?
Thank you very much, Ruchi, and I echo what Sylvia just said. Thank you, Navdanya, for inviting Etc. Group to be part of this very important collective citizens report. I'm just going to present from another example of a case study where the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, has had significant importance. It's co-written by an amazing Kenyan journalist called Zara Molu, who's one of our colleagues, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. So 4 years ago, Bill Gates stood up on a stage and said that within 2 years, he wanted to see the deployment of gene drives. For those who don't know what gene drives are, and he wanted to see that deployment within 2 years, so he would have had it out there 2 years ago. For those who don't know what gene drives are, this is a sort of radical new extreme genetic engineering technology using CRISPR gene editing, which you heard a little bit about, which allows for self-spreading genetically engineered traits. The idea is that you can engineer an organism such that those genetically engineered traits pass on to every single one of its offspring and eventually take over entire populations and entire food webs and entire ecosystems. This is a contagious GMO spreading technology. And mostly it's focused at the moment on spreading extinction and trying to remove certain species and certain traits out of the web of life. Now you can see immediately why this is a highly controversial proposal. The idea that you're going to reorder and re-engineer not just a single organism, but an entire species or the web of life is highly disruptive. It's also really a technology of control. And this is why Bill Gates and those around him are extremely interested in this. The focus of gene drive technology, the public focus has been about health applications, trying to get rid of malaria, for example. But the real interest is in agriculture. If you can spread traits in agriculture, sort of autocatalytically, then that gives tremendous control over biodiversity and over food and over people's cultures. And it's worth also noting that it's a real threat to peace, that in fact one of the largest funders in this area, besides the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, is in fact the US military. This is a wonderful way to spread bioweapons. What's obvious as you begin to look at the notion of gene drives and the fight that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years around gene drives is that gene drives are not only something that Bill Gates would like to see out there, they are a creation of the Gates Foundation. The very earliest work on CRISPR gene drives goes back to about 2005 when the Gates Foundation gave $8.5 million to Imperial College to develop CRISPR gene drives. And since then, about the same time, gave similar money at the University of California, Irvine. And in fact, if you look at all the different groups who are doing research on gene drives, many of them, most of them in fact, have links to the Gates Foundation or to allied philanthrocapitalists, such as Tata Foundation, the Open Philanthropy Project, who tend to ally themselves with the Gates Foundation. And the other large funder is, as I mentioned before, the US military, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Gates and DARPA, hand in hand, have really shaped the entire, not just the research for gene drives, but in fact the entire discussion and governance landscape. I found it interesting listening to Tim earlier when he invoked these two metaphors, the one of the man behind the curtain and the 800-pound gorilla. I think that absolutely reflects my experience of looking at the Gates Foundation around this issue of gene drives. Gates is really the 800-pound gorilla behind the curtain. I wonder if we shouldn't call it the big manipulative gorilla foundation or something like that. That the big manipulative gorilla behind the curtain is not only paying for the research, but also shaping the policy. Only literally weeks after the first working gene drive was developed, we saw the National Academy of Science and Engineering and Medicine in the US launch a huge policy process funded by the Gates Foundation and DARPA that was about trying to frame how gene drives would be governed. We then, as the issue became a global issue and came to the Convention on Biological Diversity, we saw that the Gates Foundation had put approximately $4 million, what's now about $4 million, maybe $5 million, into a PR company called Emerging Ag, who were manipulating the processes behind the curtain, were trying to stuff experts and direct experts to try and get certain outcomes in the CBD processes. And then when this issue then came to the Convention on Biological Diversity's big COP, Conference of Parties in Sharm el-Sheikh, this question of gene drives, and many were calling for a moratorium on gene drive being released. We saw at least 3 different battalions of Gates-funded organizations. We've heard about the Cornell Alliance for Science, they were there. We heard about ABNE, the African Biosafety Network of Experts, which is one of the ways in which the Gates Foundation tries to shape African policy around biotech, had sent many government delegates and changed the position of Africa on biotech around this issue. And frankly, we also saw that the parts of the media that have over time been really generously funded and paid for by the Gates Foundation were very uncomfortable to report properly on this controversy. So that's to say that in this area of developing a technology that will manipulate life, will destroy food sovereignty, and that really is a massive threat to peace, Gates, the 800-pound gorilla behind the curtain, has effectively controlled the research, the governance discussion, and also the media reporting. I'm going to just stop there. Hopefully the good news, which is that civil society is pushing back and pushing for a moratorium, and on the ground in places like Burkina Faso is saying that they won't have these release of these gene drives. Hopefully Ali Tapsoba will speak to that more effectively than I can.
Thank you so much, Jim. And exactly, Ali, can you tell us about what's the civil society and how it's resisting these attempts in Burkina Faso? We can't hear you. You'll have to unmute, Ali. Unmute.
Okay. Thank you, Rishi. Thank you for Jim to introduce me. I will try to explain with my bad English. I hope people can hear me. Okay. After the failure of beating cotton, we have now beaten mean and GMO mosquito in our country. You ask why Bill Gates like our country. We think he don't like. We want to know why Bill Gates want to destroy Africa to pass in Burkina Faso. Is our question here, because the reason why after the failure of beating cotton, accept now to continue with beating beans and mosquito. Now we can say the problem we have now.
Ali, I think we're having a little bit of trouble with your audio. Sorry, Ali, can you hear us? I think we're having a little bit of trouble with the audio with you, Ali.
Please,
come back to you.
It's good. Yes, it's good now.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely.
It's good.
Yes, it's better.
Okay. Okay. I try to explain the problem we have in Burkina Faso now. Target malaria release GMO mosquito, but until now no study to know the problem this GMO mosquito create in environmental and people. And now normally they planned a second release for last July, but with NGO fighting the no have a second release, and we hoped to don't accept the second release previous normally last year, and we would like international community talk about really the problem with Burkina Faso here, because Bill Gates give a lot of money in my country, so government cannot say nothing. Bill Gates woman is Madam Melinda Gates, come every year in my country and give lot of money to community, and so now government can say nothing to fund Bill Gates Foundation, and the rest power we can use in civil society. I don't understand if you hear me good. So, but I want to say one thing. We have sure Bill Gates cannot take power here because we know civil society and cultural people cannot accept.
Ali, I think we're losing your voice again. I think. Hello?
Yes?
Yeah, Ali, I think we're having some trouble with your audio.
Okay, I want to finish now to tell you target malaria shamed in total blow, no transparency. People host problem every time when we want to seek the opinion of local community on this project. And when they release a mosquito, until now, no study in biological, health, and social calamity this problem can create, the problem can making in my country and in Africa, because when you see mosquito travel everywhere, mosquito can travel. Now we know the release mosquito in Burkina Faso is a West African problem, and after whole African problem, because mosquito will travel everywhere. So to finish, I will ask international community to take target malaria. Burkina is very, very, very serious, dangerous, because after Burkina, they want to go to Mali, they want to go to Ghana, they want to go to Tanzania. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali, for also pointing out that this is not just a Burkina problem or a West Africa problem, but actually the issue of gene drives itself knows no political borders. It's all our problem. And with that, I would like to also invite Jonathan to talk about how Bill Gates hired a PR firm to manipulate UN over pushing gene drives.
So, can you hear me okay? This is, so first of all, I'd like to congratulate Navdanya on pulling together this report. So, you know, it's hard for me to think of any subject that's more important than the one we're talking about today. So, and also I'm very much honored to be part of this panel with everybody else here. It's very exciting, and I appreciate the invitation. So in my chapter, I wrote about how the Gates Foundation attempted to secretly manipulate a UN vote. This vote was part of a global decision-making process on a controversial genetic technology called gene drives. So gene drives, you need to know, are artificial genetic elements designed to multiply and spread in wild populations. What they spread in these populations are specific chosen genetic traits. One of the main goals of gene drive research is to develop traits that can send species extinct. That is, they're a type of GMO that is intended to be used in the wild against natural populations, either to genetically alter them, to better meet human needs, or to exterminate them entirely. In my own view, and the view of many people, gene drives are an inherently reckless and very dangerous invention. At the moment, they exist more in theory than practice, but preliminary lab experiments have shown that they may potentially work. A further important thing to understand about gene drives is that virtually all of the money funding their development comes either from the Pentagon, that is the US military, or the Gates Foundation. In 2017, the UN Convention on Biodiversity held a meeting in part to consider a moratorium on gene drives. This moratorium had been proposed by various countries and NGOs and was intended to allow better decisions about the use of gene drives. To help resolve this question, the Convention on Biodiversity organized an expert group and an online consultation involving scientists and other experts from around the world. These experts were supposed to convene in advance of the main meeting and contribute their expertise in an individual capacity. But while the meetings were ongoing, it transpired, thanks to documents released through the Freedom of Information Act, this is the US Freedom of Information Act, that the Gates Foundation had hired a PR company called Emerging Ag to recruit scientists for the various expert groups. This company, PR company, was hired also to coordinate their contributions to the discussions. It provided feedback and gave scientists headlines on, heads up information and alerted them to ongoing discussions. So the goal of this coordination was basically to derail the moratorium and support the use of gene drives, which they ultimately succeeded in doing. So that's all from me, and that pretty much summarizes the chapter that I wrote. But thanks very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. We've tried to give a very quick overview of the depth and the breadth of the interests of the Bill Gates Foundation and the profound implications, not only just on agriculture, food, health, but on our lives. Dr. Shiva, can I ask you to please close the session, provide our concluding remarks, and what do we do next? Unmute.
We are already late, so I'll be very, very brief. All over the world, people are rising against colonialism. People are pulling down Columbus's statues and other colonizer statues. It is time to realize that Gates is the new Columbus, and you want to truly decolonize, organize around Gates. We marched against Monsanto. We held public trials of Monsanto. Monsanto disappeared. It has been swallowed by Bayer, which is itself in a crisis. We must have marches against Bill Gates to basically show who is pulling the strings, who's the elephant in the room. And as was said by Tim, we, of course, love our elephants, but this metaphor tells you that the secrecy, this corruption of media, the corruption of policy, the corruption of government, the suppression of tried, tested alternatives that work for the earth and people, and to impose systems that have proven to be destructive, proven to have failed. This is high-level dictatorship in every field of our life. And Hitler was in one country. Bill Gates as a Hitler is global. If we want freedom, we will have to research him, know about him, figure out what he's doing, and we hope this report will be the first step to create a whole new movement for democracy. We have to take back our seed, now not just from Monsanto, from Bill Gates. We have to take back our food, not just from the junk food industry, but all the fake food industry that Bill Gates is funding. We have to take back our life from an anti-life individual who has decided he must extinguish life, drive species to extinction. If Hitler committed crimes against humanity for thinking of extermination as a good scientific experiment, the gene drive experiment done with US military is a crime against humanity and nature. We've never had a bigger threat to human freedom and a human future. We've never had a bigger existential threat, never a bigger democratic threat. Let's organize, let's research, let's walk the path of truth. Satyagraha is the force of truth. Today, let's begin the Satyagraha for life and freedom, together in our solidarity, our collective strength, and never giving up.
Thank you. And on that note, I thank all of you for joining us today and taking us with this impossible task of explaining everything in 4 to 5 minutes, but there is much more detail in the report. And as we promised, we will do much detailed webinars on all of these issues in the following weeks. And I invite all of you and all of you watching us to join us in this struggle and the campaign to take back our seed, our food, and our lives. Thanks once again. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Ruchi. Thank you, the Navdanya team.
Thank you, Navdanya.
Thank you. Thank you, Navdanya.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, wonderful people.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vandana.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Michael.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
It's been a pleasure.